Hi, everybody. This is Radio Free Mormon, broadcasting behind enemy lines. Tonight's episode is removing racist scripture, specifically from the Book of Mormon. Now, I have a question for you. What would you think if I told you that the LDS Church appears to be engaged in a widespread practice of removing racist scripture from the Book of Mormon? Primarily, those copies of the Book of Mormon translated for developing nations up to and including those in Africa. Yes, it appears that the LDS Church is removing racist scripture for copies of the Book of Mormon produced in Africa. Now, if I were to tell you just that much, it would be accurate, but it's not the whole story. To tell the whole story, I'm going to need the rest of this episode. So follow along with me if you will. This is going to get interesting really fast. Here's the title slide. LDS Church removes racist verses from the Book of Mormon. Now, how are they doing this, you might add? Well, first off, let's go back to this very particular verse. The single most racist verse, I believe, the one that has caused the most problems over the year in the Book of Mormon, is found in the second part of 2nd Nephi chapter 5. Now, there are a sprinkling of racist scriptures throughout the Book of Mormon. Some of them are easier to be explained away by apologists. This one is a sticking point because the language is so specific. And in fact, it is this verse that figures in the minor scandal that occurred back in January of 2020 when the brand new Come Follow Me manual was being produced by the church. It was on the Book of Mormon, and in it, when they got to 2nd Nephi chapter 5, lo and behold, what to my wondering eyes should appear but this. Here is a photograph of what that looked like. It's from 2nd Nephi chapter 5, verses 20 and 21. Remember those scriptures, okay? 20 and 21. That's going to be important here in just a couple of minutes. The heading says, what is the curse that came upon the Lamanites? Here is the quote. By the way, this includes verses from the Book of Mormon, but the quote itself is from Joseph Fielding Smith in his book, Answers to Gospel Questions, specifically book number 3. Let's read this, shall we? Quote, the dark skin was placed upon the Lamanites so that they could be distinguished from the Nephites and to keep the two peoples from mixing. See 2nd Nephi 5:21 through 23, and also Alma 3:6 through 10. The dark skin, continuing with the quote from Joseph Fielding Smith, the dark skin was the sign of the curse. The curse was the withdrawal of the Spirit of the Lord. See 2nd Nephi 5:20. Dark skin is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. Note that last part again. Dark skin is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. Well, this is remarkable, especially since it was written before 1978, well before 1978, and the lifting of the priesthood and temple ban on Black people. So what on earth is going on here? First off, let's talk about the ruckus that the inclusion of this material in the Come Follow Me manual caused back in 2020. There's the volume. That's volume 3 of Answers to Gospel Questions. Each of these was originally written as a question and answer for the improvement era. They got taken out, assembled, put together, and published in several volumes as Answers to Gospel Questions. There are some that are available with all of them just in one volume. And here it is as it was written. There's 2 pages there. Now, what I'm going to do before I get to that is I'm going to go to the ruckus it caused. Then I'll come back to this point because Elder Gary Stevenson was tasked with going to the NAACP luncheon in January of 2020 and apologizing for the recent discovery that this old racist stuff had been included in the new manual. This was quite a thorn for the LDS Church, who's trying to make inroads with the NAACP and convince them that they're not still racist. So this is what Elder Gary Stevenson had to do. Here's a newspaper headline: NAACP luncheon honors Huntsman Foundation, Rosie Rivera, and Elder Stevenson encourages all to build upon our common ground. Well, there was a lot more that happened at that particular meeting. It happened right at the beginning. And here's what happened. Elder Stevenson preceded his remarks by expressing regret that the church's 2020 Come Follow Me Gospel Study Manual includes an old statement that dark skin in the Book of Mormon was the sign of a curse. Elder Stevenson disavowed that statement. Now, of course, the funny part is you can disavow a statement from President Joseph Fielding Smith in his answers to gospel questions, but it's harder to disavow the same statement when it appears in the Book of Mormon, because Joseph Fielding Smith wasn't just making this up. He was actually accurately describing what the text of the Book of Mormon says in 2 Nephi chapter 5. So here's Elder Stevenson pretending that this is actually just something that a prior apostle came up with, instead of pointing out that really it's in the Book of Mormon itself. And it's harder for a Mormon apostle to disavow the Book of Mormon than a prior leader. Here's what he said. One of our recent church manuals includes a paragraph with some outdated commentary about race, he said. No need to get into specifics here. It was mistakenly included in the printed version of the manual, which had been prepared for print nearly 2 years ago. So this is in 2020. Here's Elder Stevenson saying, yeah, that was 2 years ago. That was back in 2018. That was back when we were still racist. But now we realize in 2020, this shouldn't be here. That's the implication of what it is he's saying. Let's go on. Which had been prepared for print nearly 2 years ago. When it was brought to the attention of church leaders late last year, they directed that it be immediately removed in our annual online manual, which is used by the great majority of our members. We have also directed that any future printed manuals will reflect this change. So this is what happened. We have some audio and video of Elder Stevenson making this announcement, this apology before the NAACP. And he was very smart, or very lucky, in that he picked the time to announce it when everybody was still eating. So you can hear the clink of the plates. You can hear people chatting at their table. Almost nobody's paying any attention to what it is he's saying. And this was the perfect time for him to make the mention of this unfortunate inclusion in the Come Follow Me manual and make apologies for it. He also said, we're asking our members to disregard the paragraph in the printed manual. Now, I've got to ask a question. Did he do that? Did the church do that? Did anybody from the church ever ask the members to disregard the paragraph in the printed manual? Because I'm not aware of it if they did. I don't know everything. Some things get by me. If anybody out there knows of any instance where the church asked its members to disregard that paragraph in the manual, please let me know, because I think this is not true. I don't think the church ever asked the members to disregard that paragraph in the printed manual. He goes on, now I'm deeply saddened and hurt by this error and for any pain that it may have caused our members and for others. I would just like to reiterate our position as a church is clear. Yeah, it's really clear. In spite of this thing that got put in there with everybody sanctioned 2 years ago, our position is clear today. We do condemn all racism, past and present, including in the Book of Mormon, Gary Stevenson, in any form, and we disavow any theory advanced that black or dark skin is a sign of a curse. Gary Stevenson just disavowed the Book of Mormon. We are brothers and sisters, he concludes, and I consider you friends. I love and appreciate you, he said, drawing applause from those gathered. Okay, so let's see what this sounds like. This is awful on the video. You can hear the audio, especially when you know what it is that he said. That's why I went through the script and the quote of what he said first. The camera will jump around. It's not very good video. The audio is passable. Let's see what it says and if we can hear it.
Now, prior to my prepared remarks, I'd like to address a matter with you. Some of you may be aware from a news article published over the weekend, one of our recent church manuals includes a paragraph with some outdated commentary about race. It was mistakenly included in the printed version of the manual, which had been prepared for print nearly 2 years ago. When it was brought to the attention of church leaders late last year, they directed that it be immediately removed in our annual online manual, which is used by the great majority of our members. We have also directed that any future printed manuals that will reflect this change. We're asking our members to disregard the paragraph in the printed manual. Now, I'm deeply saddened and hurt by this error and for any pain that may have caused our members and for others. I'd just like to reiterate our position as a church is clear. We do condemn all racism, past and present. in any form, and we disavow any theory advanced that black or dark skin is a sign of a curse. We are brothers and sisters, and I consider you friends. I love and appreciate you, and as a church, we're thankful for your relationship.
Wow, if this were the only thing I was covering in this podcast, it would be titled Mormon Apostle Disavows Book of Mormon, because that's what he did right there, without anybody being any the wiser. Apparently, they think it's just some prior Joe Schmo leader who wrote this or who opined about this. No, it's actually the Book of Mormon itself. But that is not the entire subject of this podcast. Instead, this podcast is about the LDS Church engaging apparently in intentional efforts to remove racist scripture from the books of Mormon that are being produced for third world countries, including some in Africa. So let's go to the next part, where this is actually where it occurs in 2 Nephi chapter 5. You can see there's a line there right under verse 20, and verse 21 begins right under that blue line. And this is the passage that I'm talking about, the very difficult, the very racist passage in the Book of Mormon, the one that there's really no two ways about it being racist. That's why it's such a thorny issue for the church, as it was for Gary Stevenson back in January of 2020, when the church inadvertently included the correct commentary on this passage. Here we go. And he had caused the cursing to come upon them, yea, even a sore cursing, because of their iniquity. For behold, they had hardened their hearts against him, that they had become like unto a flint. Wherefore, as they were white and exceedingly fair and delightsome, that they might not be enticing unto my people, the Lord God did cause a skin of blackness to come upon them. See how this is pretty hard to get around? It's very straightforward. Verse 22, and thus saith the Lord God, I will cause that they shall be loathsome unto thy people, say they shall repent of their iniquities, and cursed. See, the word curse is there, connected with the black skin, and cursed shall be the seed of him that mixeth with their seed, for they shall be cursed even with the same cursing. And the Lord spake it, and it was done. So there's this curse of a black skin upon all those who are wicked, and that curse of the black will follow to the children of those with the curse. Sound familiar? And because of the cursing which was upon them, they became an idle people. Now, notice that that's not the curse. The curse is an idleness. See, that's what it says in the Book of Mormon. And because of their cursing which was upon them, they did become an idle people, full of mischief and subtlety, and did seek in the wilderness for beasts of prey, which is really weird to eat beasts of prey. Usually we eat beasts that are not beasts of prey. So how wicked is that? Finally, verse 25, and the Lord God said unto me, they shall be a scourge unto thy seed. This is God talking to Nephi about the Lamanites, to stir them up in remembrance of me. And inasmuch as they will not remember me and hearken unto my words, they shall scourge them even unto destruction. Now, that is the passage of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 verses, very significant passage in the Book of Mormon regarding this racist doctrine of the black skin coming upon the wicked as a sign of the curse put upon them by God. Now, the chapter continues to go on after that, talking about Nephi consecrating his brothers, Jacob and Joseph, and a number of other things after that. But you can see where the line is, right between verse 20 and verse 21. If you were to stop in 2 Nephi 5 at verse 20 and eliminate the rest of it, or at least the following 5 verses, you would have gone a long way toward taking the racist verses out of the Book of Mormon. Now, I want to go back for a second, first to the explanation that Elder Stevenson gave for the inclusion of this part from the Book of Mormon and Joseph Fielding Smith. He states it was mistakenly included in the printed version of the manual. I think that's not true. I don't think this was a mistake at all. I think it was very intentionally put into the manual. And the reason I think so is because look at how it was phrased. The last line, dark skin is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. Of course, they wanted that in there. They want people to understand that even though the Book of Mormon calls it a curse, that Joseph Fielding Smith has said that the dark skin of the Lamanites, which is what the Book of Mormon is talking about, but dark skin, is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. Of course, they wanted that in there. This was put in there quite deliberately. This was no mistake. This was no boating accident. The amazing thing is, and something I hadn't really noticed before because I hadn't really looked before, is that they have to twist what Joseph Fielding Smith actually wrote in the article in Answers to Gospel Questions in order to make it say that, because he doesn't say that. He does not say that dark skin is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. Notice the presence of ellipses in this quote. There are ellipses right before dark skin and ellipses right after dark skin. I wonder what they're hiding there. So there's some language that we don't get, then we get dark skin, then some more language that we don't get, and then we have is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. So now this is why I want to go to the actual article itself. What they've done is they have taken two quotes very far apart in this one article. The first quote is over here on the left. You can see the arrow on the left. The question is about the present status of the Lamanites. And the first part there on the left, the dark skin was placed upon the Lamanites so that they could be distinguished from the Nephites and to keep the two people from mixing. The dark skin was the sign of the curse. So you can see that part right there. Let's go back. Yes, that's what we just read. The dark skin was placed upon the Lamanites so that they could be distinguished from the Nephites and to keep the two peoples from mixing. The dark skin was the sign of the curse. Oh, it goes on. The curse was the withdrawal of the Spirit of the Lord. So let's see if we can find that in there. Yeah, that's right after it. The curse was the withdrawal of the Spirit of the Lord. So the first part of the quote is way over here. It's the very first part of the answer on the left side of the page. Now, to get to the rest of the quote, remember the rest of the quote is this. Dark skin is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. That's the important part that they wanted to get across when they intentionally included it in the manual, contra Elder Gary Stevenson's claim that it was a mistake. Here is what it says over there. You have to go all the way over to the right side. You see that white arrow there pointing to the text? The dark skin of those who have come into the church is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. Wait a second. What we find out when we go to the actual source is that what Joseph Fielding Smith is not saying is that dark skin should no longer be considered a sign of the curse, period, in some kind of general sense that would apply across the board. No, he's speaking specifically of Lamanites who join the church. Only Lamanites who join the church can have this status of not having their dark skin be considered a sign of the curse anymore. Once again, this is what he wrote originally. The dark skin of those who have come into the church is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. Now, how is that quote from Joseph Fielding Smith recast? Right there it is at the bottom, dark skin. Now, notice something important here. It's okay usually to have ellipses as long as you're not changing the meaning. At least they're showing the ellipses, even though they are completely changing the meaning. One of the things they did here, which is no good, which is that they capitalized the D in dark skin. Why is that a no-no? Because it was not capitalized in the original citation. See there, it's just a little d because it starts with the dark skin of those who have come into the church is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. And what they ended up doing was they capitalized the dark skin as if it began the sentence without bracketing the capitalized D to show that they had changed it from small case to large case. This is part of the deception that they're trying to pull on the members. And dark skin, ... We leave out all the part about of the Lamanites who joined the church. And then we just have dark skin, ... is no longer to be considered a sign of the curse. That's deception. That's the improper use of ellipses. And that's what the church was doing when they originally thought it would be a good idea to put this into the 2020 manual. It is obvious it was not mistaken. It was well thought out. It was well planned. And this quote was actually edited in such a way as to give an incorrect impression of what it was that Joseph Fielding Smith actually wrote in the first place. So this was not a mistake at all. Okay, now having established that, which I think was very interesting and a byproduct of what it was that I researched in coming up with this talk, let's go to the main part of today's presentation, which does have to do with the line in 2 Nephi 5, right between verse 20 and verse 21. Remember, if you read verse 20, wherefore the word of the Lord was fulfilled, which he spake unto me, saying that inasmuch as they will not hearken unto thy words, they shall be cut off from the presence of the Lord. And behold, they were cut off from his presence. So if you were just to stop at verse 20, you would have nothing about a dark skin. You'd still have the same basic idea in there about the Lamanites being cut off from the presence of the Lord because they don't obey him. So having established that that is the cutoff point between verse 20 and verse 21, let's go on and let's look at a couple of copies of the Book of Mormon for different languages, some of them in Africa. First off is the Afik language. Now, the Afik language is the indigenous language of the Afik people who are situated in the present-day Cross River State and Akwa Ibom State of Nigeria, as well as in the northwest of Cameroon. And you can see there's Nigeria, northwest of Cameroon. The use of this language goes across the border there of Nigeria into Cameroon. So this is the Afik or Efik language. Now, I was completely oblivious to this important fact until last week's interview with Summer Rain and Charles, aka Black Priesthood. He's the one who brought this up to me. I had never heard this before. And so he's from Nigeria. So he was specifically clued in to this aspect of the Book of Mormon that they have in his native language, Charles' native language of Efik. And that's where he's from. And that's what he spoke originally. Now, here is the table of contents in the Efik Book of Mormon. We're going to spend a little bit of time with this because what the church has been doing is in a number of languages, they have been producing not initially the entire translation of the Book of Mormon, but instead they present a much more limited translation of the Book of Mormon. It may be a 5 to 10% of the total Book of Mormon that gets translated. It's obviously much thinner than the complete Book of Mormon. And then the missionaries use these very, very small edited copies of the Book of Mormon to teach the people. Eventually, once the church gets established, it gets going, it gets built up, there's enough members, time will go by, and then the church will make a decision as to whether they're going to start a complete translation of the Book of Mormon. And if they do that, then a number of years will go by before they have the complete translation completed, right? But what's going on in Nigeria right now is this more limited copy of the Book of Mormon. It only has selections of the Book of Mormon. So I'm going to call it the Selections Book of Mormon, the one that only has this 5 to 10% of selections from the Book of Mormon between its covers. So the note here is that these are preliminary translations for use in church and by missionaries. Full translations are expected to follow at some point. Second note, 2 Nephi 5 is the only chapter in the Book of Mormon not translated in full. Okay, so this is Efik, and this is the Book of Mormon. If you look over here, I'm going to bring myself down below the slide in order to make the print a little bit larger there. That's much better. So even though I don't speak Efik, nor do I read it, I'll tell you what this title page is, okay? It says the Book of Mormon, then underneath it, you'll have 1 Nephi, 2 Nephi. You can actually see Nephi and Nephi. You can read those. That's 1 Nephi and 2 Nephi. What this is doing in the title page of the Selections Book of Mormon in Efik for Nigerian saints, okay? Nigerian Mormons, is that it shows us what has been translated. And what has been translated there, as you can see, is chapters 1 through 7 of 1 Nephi, then a comma, and then chapters 16 through 18 of 1 Nephi. That's in the table of contents. The next book is the book of 2 Nephi. And there we're going to see something really interesting, okay? What we're going to see is that the first 4 chapters are translated, but not all of the 5th chapter is translated. If you look at the highlight, you'll see it. What is translated of chapter 5 of 2 Nephi in the Selections Book of Mormon in Efik for the Nigerian saints? Only verses 1 through 20. They stop at 20. They don't go past 20. They don't go into the racist language of the dark skin being a curse. That is omitted. And as we go through it, you will see that this is the only instance in which a full chapter is not translated. In other words, they cut the chapter in half, okay? It may be 2/3 to 1/3. You get the idea. They didn't complete the translation. And one suspects that the reason that they stopped at verse 20 is because they didn't want to include those racist passages in the Epic Book of Mormon that's going to be read by Black saints in Africa, because maybe they might get the idea that having a dark skin is not too welcome in the Mormon church, and certainly not in the pages of the Book of Mormon. After that, we have chapter 9 translated in full, chapter 29 translated in full, and chapters 31 through 33 translated in full. Okay, so now underneath that, if you look at Jacob, it has the word Eduhed, and Eduhed means it's not translated. So in this Selections Book of Mormon, there is nothing from the book of Jacob that is included. So there you have Jacob, which appears to be not translated at all. Enos, which is translated. See Eduhed versus Ophiri. Jerem, Omni, Words of Mormon, none of that's translated. When you get to Mosiah, you have chapters 2 through 5, chapter 17, chapter 18. When you get to Alma, you have chapter 5 translated, chapter 11, chapter 12, chapter 32, chapter 34, chapter 39 through 42. Helaman, only chapters 13 through 16 are translated. Third Nephi, chapter 1, chapter 8, and chapters 11 through 30 to capture the entire ministry of Jesus to the Nephites. Fourth Nephi is translated. Mormon has only chapters 1, 4, and 6 through 9 translated. Ether is not translated, and Moroni is translated in full. So that is what constitutes the Selections version of the Book of Mormon that is prepared for use in certain third world countries, including some in Africa, including Nigeria, specifically including the Epic language. Now that we've gone through the entire table of contents, you can see there is only one chapter in the Book of Mormon that is not completely translated, and that is 2 Nephi 5, which stops, as I said, at verse 20. Every other chapter in the Book of Mormon is completely translated. It's not halted and cut off in the middle, which I think is significant. So the Epic Book of Mormon, 2 Nephi 5, ends with verse 20. I actually looked it up on the church website so you could see it in the book itself and not just on the table of contents. Here's the Epic Book of Mormon, and here is 2 Nephi at the top. You can see it 2 Nephi 5. Chapter 5 begins right here. It continues through the next page, and then it goes, it stops right there. It stops there on the next page. So let's see where it stops, okay? And what you can see there is that it ends with verse 20. Verse 20 at the bottom of the page ends up being the last verse translated, and then it stops. And then it starts again with chapter 9, just like it said in the table of contents. It does not complete the translation of 2 Nephi 5. It stops at verse 20, right before it gets to that really problematic racist passage about the dark skin and the curse. So there you can see it yourself in the Selections edition of the Epic Book of Mormon, currently in use in Africa. All right. Now, here is 2 Nephi chapter 5 in the English Book of Mormon, so you can understand what it is that is in the translation in Epic and what has been taken out. So chapter 5, it talks about the Nephites separate themselves from the Lamanites, keep the law of Moses, and build a temple. I'm in the introductory part. Because of their unbelief, the Lamanites are cut off from the presence of the Lord, are cursed, and become a scourge unto the Nephites. So that's what this entire chapter is about. And there it is in English, chapter 5. And here's the part that was translated, going on into verses 18, 19, and finally there at the bottom on the right, you see 2 Nephi 5:20. That got translated as well. And here we go to that slide that shows the blue line where the church cut off the translation of 2 Nephi chapter 5 right after verse 20 and right before the commencement in verse 21 of the scriptures talking about dark skin being a curse. And the question is this just an accident, or did the church do this intentionally? In other words, did this just happen to be something that they thought, well, this chapter is getting kind of long and we're doing a Selections edition of the Book of Mormon. We don't really need everything that's in this chapter. We've already made our point. Let's just cut it off right here, shall we? Is that what happened? Or is this something a little more sinister and a little more devious? You know, devious like misquoting Joseph Fielding Smith to make it look like he said something that he completely did not say, like they did in the 2020 manual, that part that got taken out, remember? Is this more something like this, or is this completely innocent? And I wanted to show you also how far it goes after verse 21 and after they cut it off, because it continues to go down there through verse 30. You can see on this slide, and it continues then down there to verse 34. And it sufficeth me to say that 40 years had passed away, and we had already had wars and contentions with our brethren. So chapter 5 of 2nd Nephi goes all the way up to verse 34, and what they did was they cut it at verse 20. So not exactly in half, as you can tell, but we can see where they cut it off, and we can guess pretty accurately why it is they chose to cut it off there. Somebody somewhere at some point in the church thought it would be a good idea in making these editions of the Book of Mormon to cut 2nd Nephi chapter 5 off right after verse 20 and before verse 21 started stinking up the joint. So I went and did a little bit more research to see if I could find a similar thing going on in other African languages, and I came up with this edition of the Book of Mormon, another selections edition of the Book of Mormon in the Gusii language, Gusii, which is spoken in Kenya. It is spoken natively by 2.2 million people as of 2009, mostly among the Abagusii. That's the people who use this language. So there's a picture. You can see Kenya there. And there is a selections version of the Book of Mormon in this language. And here, once again, is the table of contents, and it is identical. The language is different. The table of contents is identical. And you can see in the underlined part in 2nd Nephi that they follow the exact same pattern in this language as they did in the Ephic language, which is that they have 2nd Nephi chapter 5, but only up to verse 20. That's it. And then it goes on to chapter 9. So this selections edition of the Book of Mormon, everything else, by the way, is identical as well. It appears that this is a pre-thought out plan that they have already at some point figured out how they're going to structure this selections version of the Book of Mormon. And they do it every time they have a selections version of the Book of Mormon. They do these chapters, the ones that we saw in the Ephic language, exactly the same, including stopping after verse 20 in 2nd Nephi 5. They do the same thing here in this Gusii language in Kenya, and they remove the racist passage as well. Is there a reason that they're doing this is the question. And I think the reason is probably pretty obvious to everybody here by now. Now, I note that these translations, the selections versions of the Book of Mormon, also skirt the following passages. In other words, not only does it cut out 2nd Nephi 5 after verse 20 to remove that racist passage, as I said, there are other passages, racist passages in the Book of Mormon. And this particular selections version of the Book of Mormon manages to skirt all of them, I believe. For instance, 1 Nephi 12, 22 through 23, which says, I saw the seed of my brethren had become a dark and loathsome and a filthy people. That's not in the selections version. 2 Nephi 5, 21 through 25, we've already talked about that. That's not in the selections version. They had to cut off 2 Nephi 5 right in the middle in order to avoid having that show up. 2 Nephi 30, 5 through 6, then shall they rejoice, and their scales of darkness shall begin to fall, and they shall be a pure and a delightsome people. Note, white and delightsome was the original phrasing before changes in later editions. 1837 was when they changed it, I believe. Joseph Smith actually changing it himself. That passage from 2 Nephi chapter 30, also not in the selections version of the Book of Mormon. And you will note here that they skip that chapter entirely. They do translate 2 Nephi chapter 29. That's in the selections version. They also include chapters 31 through 33, which is the last chapter in 2 Nephi. So they put in 29 through 33, but they skip chapter 30 for some reason. And the question that some might ask is the reason that they skipped it because of this particular passage that's in it, 2 Nephi 35 through 6. Then shall they rejoice, and their scales of darkness shall begin to fall, and they shall be a pure and a delightsome people. Once again, that was white and delightsome originally. Jacob chapter 3, verses 5 and verses 8 through 9. Remember, Jacob is not translated at all. The Lamanites, their skins will be whiter than yours if you are not obedient. Their filthiness came because of their fathers. Revile no more against them because of the darkness of their skins. Okay, we don't have that in the selections Book of Mormon because Jacob is not translated at all. Alma 3, verses 6 through 9, verse 14 and verse 19, we have the following. The Lord God set a mark upon them, that they might not mix and believe in incorrect traditions. Whosoever did mingle his seed with that of the Lamanites did bring the same curse upon his seed. This was done that whosoever should mingle his seed should be cursed like unto them. All of that found in Alma chapter 3. None of that found in the selections version of the Book of Mormon because it doesn't have Alma 3 in it. And finally, 3 Nephi chapter 2, verses 14 through 16, which says their curse was taken from them, talking about the Lamanites. Their curse was taken from them, and their skin became white like unto the Nephites. Once again, 3 Nephi chapter 2, not translated in the selections copy of the Book of Mormon. So what we have here is we know that the Book of Mormon has a number of racist scriptures in it. The selections version of the Book of Mormon, which the church has made for the people in the Efik language and the Gusi language in Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya, respectively, manages to avoid every single one of these passages about dark skin and cursing and wickedness and racism. All of these verses are omitted in the selections version of the Book of Mormon, with the obvious result that anybody in Nigeria reading the selections version of the Book of Mormon in Efik are never going to see any of these passages. And also that a person in Kenya who's reading the Book of Mormon is never going to read these passages in the selections version of the Book of Mormon because they have been taken out, and it appears intentionally. Now, when there's 5 to 10% of the entire Book of Mormon that's being reproduced or translated for a certain edition, certainly we could see that all of these could be left out inadvertently, that there's no planning going on, that there's nothing insidious going on or deceptive going on. This is just by chance. The thing that gives the lie to that interpretation, in my mind, is the fact that they cut 2 Nephi chapter 5. Boom, right in half, and boom, right where it starts talking about that dark skin and the curse. I think that is the smoking gun that shows that this is done very intentionally by the church in their selections version of the Book of Mormon. Now, it's not just languages in Africa either. This selections version is available in other languages, and the Quiche language is one of those, or the Quiche language. This language is a Mayan language spoken by the Quiche people of the Central Highlands in Guatemala and Mexico. With over 1 million speakers, Quiche is the second most widely spoken language in the country after Spanish. It is one of the most widely spoken indigenous American languages in Mesoamerica. So what did the church do with the Book of Mormon when it came time to translate it into Quiche? They did the exact same thing. This is how I can tell, I believe, that the selections version of the Book of Mormon was decided some time ago, 1979, by the way. Some time ago, this was started. And if you look at the title page in the Quiche language, you can see the exact same chapters being translated and the exact same chapters not being included, up to and including 2 Nephi chapter 5, which you will see there in the highlighted part on that title page. Once again, it only goes chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. It stops at 20. The next thing that's going to be included is the beginning of chapter 9, just as we saw in the Efik and the Gusi language. Same with the Quiche language, which was translated back in 1979. So this has been going on for quite a long time. Now, why it is that the Mormon Church wouldn't want the Quiche people of Guatemala to be reading about their ancestors having a dark skin and it being a curse from God, that's anybody's guess. I'll let you figure that one out. It's not just Black people in Africa that the church wants to hide this from. There's other people around who are impacted by this curse. And they didn't get to know about it, at least not initially, with the first selections copy of the Book of Mormon that was translated into Quiche. Okay, now there is a page at the church website that has all the different copies of the Book of Mormon that have been translated. And it also shows those that were originally translated as selections versions of the Book of Mormon. And if they ended up being translated in full, it shows when that happened as well. It gives the year for it. So here's the breakdown of that information from that page. Some languages have a complete Book of Mormon translated at the outset. There's no selections, Book of Mormon in between as a stopgap, including languages spoken in Africa, including Ghana, which is the Twi language, and the Congo, as well as parts of Nigeria, other parts of Nigeria, the Igbo language. So what I'm saying here is that there are languages African languages into which the Book of Mormon is translated that don't have a selections version of the Book of Mormon first. They just have the full translation, including all these passages. So it is only some languages in Africa in which a selections version of the Book of Mormon is translated, not all of them. These three languages never had a selections version of the Book of Mormon, but had the original Book of Mormon in its entirety translated at the outset. Other languages are introduced with a selections version first. These consistently have the same chapters published and also consistently omit 2 Nephi 5 from verse 21 on. So let me back up here for a second and say, not all African languages have these verses omitted. And there are translations of the Book of Mormon with these verses omitted that occur in languages other than African languages. All right. Many of these latter languages wind up with a complete translation, usually around maybe 20 to 30 years after the selections. It can actually be from 10 years to over 30 years. One was almost 40 years after the selections version was introduced. For instance, Swahili had a selections version introduced in 1982. It was followed up 18 years later with a full translation in the year 2000. So Swahili speakers have a full copy of the Book of Mormon, although for 18 years they only had the selections version, which omitted those particular verses that we've been talking about. Other selections versions of the Book of Mormon remain as only selections. Some show a complete translation has commenced. Okay. So there are some that started as selections. They're still selections now. Some started as selections and they have been fully translated now. But others are in between and they started as selections and they have a full translation that has been commenced but not completed. And you can find out all that information on the page at the church website that you can find following this link. So I have gone ahead and I have brought that link up here on the stage. It's a bit small. Let me see if I can make it at all bigger there for you to see. It is on the page that is called Translations and Formats of the Scriptures. I'm at the link that involves the Book of Mormon, of course. And what it states is that there have been 115 official translations. There have been 21 selections from the Book of Mormon. That's the Book of Mormon we're talking about, the Selections Book of Mormon. There have been 21 of those. There are 22 translations in progress and 3 language study editions. That is the current update as reflected on the church's website. Now, of course, English was the first translation. It started with a full translation. There was no selections edition for that. Danish was a full translation. German. This is chronological in terms of when the translations were made. You got Welsh, you got Hawaiian, you got Spanish, you got Swedish. These are all full translations. It had not occurred to anybody to do anything other than a full translation at the beginning until the 1970s. Here's Afrikaans. That was a full translation in 1972. Thai, 76. Indonesia, full translation, 1977. And here is the very first language into which the Book of Mormon was translated as a selections edition. That's Aymara, Aymara. That was done in 1977, the year before the priesthood restriction was lifted on blacks and also the temple restriction as well. Then you can look down here at Cachiquel. That's a 1978 edition, selections. Croatian starts with a full translation. Quechua in Peru starts in 1979 with a selections version, and so on. And you can get all the information through this page. Now, here is Ethic. We talked about that. That was done in 1983, that Book of Mormon, the selections version. It's the only one they have available to them in their language. But this page tells us that 4 years ago in 2021, a translation of the entire Book of Mormon in the language of Ethic was commenced. We have no idea how long it's going to take or when it will be completed, but according to this page, it has been commenced. And if we go down here to the Kisi or Gusi language, which we talked about as well, that has a similar history. In 1983, the selections version of the Book of Mormon was commenced. There is no complete translation that has been commenced in this language, but in 2017, they did make it available digitally, but that's just the same selections version that's available on the church website. In fact, that's where I got those screen grabs of the actual version of this Book of Mormon to show you in earlier slides. So once again, you can find all the information you want here. I thought it was important to give you that additional information so that you can have the entirety of the story. So let's start with the obvious conclusion that it makes sense that in certain languages, perhaps languages that are not so common, that a selections version of the Book of Mormon would be conceived of and produced for use by missionaries and members in a new area that really hasn't seen a lot of missionary work or missionaries to promote the missionary work. That makes sense because you can get that produced and distributed more quickly than you could an entire translation, which is going to take years. That makes sense. I get that much. The thing I don't get is why they're cutting 2 Nephi chapter 5 in half in order to avoid those racist verses. That's the part I don't get. Or at least I should say, that's the part that the innocent explanation doesn't really do a very good job of accounting for. So I think this was an idea that they came up with to get a selections version of the Book of Mormon out more quickly in a given language. But I think that certain people use that good idea in order to get rid of certain passages in the Book of Mormon that they didn't want people in the proposed language to read, that they didn't want new members of the church or investigators in that new language to be able to read about it. It is hidden from them. And apparently, the idea is to hide it from them for a period of years and even decades until such time as the church is established strongly enough among them that they can handle the truth, I guess, that they can get a complete copy of the Book of Mormon. They can read 2 Nephi chapter 5 past verse 20 and find out all the wonderful things that the Book of Mormon has to say about black skin and about how God feels about that color of skin. Still, the question remains, why is it that commencing in the late 1970s, the LDS Church began the practice of producing selections from the Book of Mormon, and why it is these versions consistently avoid the curse of dark skin passage commencing in 2 Nephi chapter 5, verse 21. A secondary question remains as to why the rest of the selections versions of the Book of Mormon also managed to avoid every other problematic Book of Mormon passage relating to skin color. Is this just coincidence, or is this something more? But perhaps the most perplexing question of all is why the LDS Church is producing and distributing selections versions of the Book of Mormon for many of their Black members in Africa, and how those Black members in Africa will feel when they finally hear the rest of the story, when they finally read the parts of the Book of Mormon that the church had hidden from them in their selections versions of the Book of Mormon. Well, that's about all for tonight. Please hit like, please hit subscribe, please leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of the show and whether you think this is intentional or whether this is just something that's being done in good faith by the church, which just happens to look like they're trying to keep members of the church and investigators in developing countries in the dark about what the Book of Mormon really has to say about dark skin. Thank you so much for all of my listeners who have gone the extra mile and gone to radiofreemormon.org and made a donation there, especially a continuing donation. $5 a month is all we ask. If you can do more, fantastic. Thank you so much for all of you who have made that donation. If you haven't made a donation yet, please go there today, radiofreemormon.org. Make a continuing donation today. Your donations keep Radio Free Mormon broadcasting behind enemy lines. Well, as I say, that's about all for tonight. Thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Radio Free Mormon, signing off the air.